Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be making a stylized dust trail in Blender. Recently I had one of my posts go viral, so I'm starting to do a breakdown taking you from point A to point B, as well as a scene breakdown and comp that I used for this project. So let's get right into it. So back in Blender, we're going to start by adding a cube. So Shift A, add a cube, scale it down. We want it to line up with the tires, so scale it on the y-axis, shift on the x-axis. This should be fine. Then we're going to add a UV sphere, shift it to a corner, scale it down a bit, apply shade smooth. Clicking back on our cube, we're going to come to our object properties, scroll down to see the visibility tab, and we're going to disable camera and shadow. Scrolling down till we see our viewport display, we change from display as textured to wire. Now what this does is it allows us to manipulate or use this cube as a source of the emitter without it being displayed or rendered in Blender. So we're going to come into our particle properties and add a new emission. Set count to 400 or whatever you're good with. For my timeline, I chose 240, so it plays through the entire timeline. And as for the life cycle, I set it to 10 because this is how short I want each particle to stay. Coming down to our velocity tab, we change the normal velocity from 1 to 0.5, and I would want to control how the particles move in a particular axis. So I'll change the velocity on the y-axis from 0 to 1. Before anything else, we would need to change the field weights. So come down to field weights and change the gravity from 1 to 0. Now when we play back our animation, it plays as intended, but it doesn't always work properly. So to ensure it works properly, we're going to apply scale of the cube. Now we want to make those instances real, so we'll come to our render in our particle emission system and set it from halo to object, and we select the UV sphere. Now we change the scale from 0.05 to 0.4 and the random scale value to around 0.5. This is okay, but I would want to play with the scale a bit more. Then, as you see, once we play the animation, it works as intended. So once we have this set in Blender, the next thing to do is add some solid colors. So we're going to come into render view, disable overlays, and we're going to add a material. Delete the principal BSDF and add an emission shader. Connect that in and we choose a color. Once we play it to the animation, it works fine, but there's a problem. It's opaque, so it doesn't look as pleasing as we want it to, which takes us to our next step, which is adding subtle varieties of color and opacity. So to do that in Blender, we're going to need a few extra nodes. The first one being a hue saturation value node, a color ramp, and an object info node. This node setup allows us to play with the variety in colors. So I'm going to plug the random into the factor of the color ramp, connect the color to the factor of the hue saturation value node, and connect the color to the color of the emission. Then we're going to set color again. And now I want to play with the slider and some of the values. You see it affects it. So you just set the parameters that work best for you. So this is what I ended up with that I like. And now to play the animation, you see the color variety. Now let's add the subtle transparency. So add a transparent node, transparent BSDF. We duplicate our color ramp, set color back to white, plug in the random value into the factor of the color ramp, plug the color into the color, and we're going to connect the emission and the transparent node. So if you have node wrangler enabled, you can just shift control, left click, drag the two nodes you want to connect, and they connect automatically. Now we're gonna select the color of our color ramp and plug it to the factor of the mix shader. This allows us to play with the opacity as we see fit. So something like this is okay for me. Now you see this bit of noise. The way we can fix that is by coming to our material properties, scrolling down till you get to your settings, surfaces, render method, change it from detailed to blended, and you get a better view. So once you play the animation back, that's good. So all we need to do is just duplicate, and there we have it. Stylized industrial. If you've made it this far into the video and you found it helpful, do well to subscribe, like, share, and follow as a way to help support the channel. So here's a quick breakdown of how I made this ground texture and how I was able to animate it. So here's a simple breakdown. So I started with a simple wave texture, editing the parameters as you see on screen, connecting the color to a color ramp set to constant, and choosing the colors I prefer, which looks like this. Now, I wanted to play with the edges of the wave texture while also breaking them. So a fun way to do that is by having a texture coordinate node connected to a mapping node, a vector mapping node, which is then connected to the vector of a noise texture. I then played with the scale of the noise, so it would look something like this. Now, for us to be able to manipulate the wave texture, I then connected the mapping node and the noise to a mix color set to mix with a factor of 0.4. The factor of the noise texture goes to point B and the vector goes to point A. Then we connect the result to the vector of the wave texture. So what we have is something like this. By the time we connect it back to the color ramp, set back to constant, it looks more like this. I also added a gradient, so while I'm going to be comping, it's going to look more glowy. So it's going to be like this. And now, to join everything together, we're going to be adding a mix color node set to add. So by the time we connect the color ramp to the mix color set to input B, and we put everything into a diffuse BSDF, the result looks something like this. And how I was able to animate it is by creating an offset driver on the x-axis. And to do that, you just click on it, you type frame, and the driver is put in. Once you play your animation, it plays. But the reason why it doesn't play right now is because we used it in caps lock. So make sure that it's turned off and you're using small letters. So by the time you play it, it plays. If you want to modify the speed, you can come back in and either multiply it or divide it. As for me, I divided it based on the speed I'm working with by 80. So playing back the animation plays how I want it to. Here's the full node setup. As for my node setup, it looked something more like this. So I'll be taking you through each of the nodes and what they do. We first have the color convert space. Now, if you want an in-depth explanation of this, there's a video that I would link down below. You can watch it to have the full in-depth knowledge of why this is set first. But moving forward, we then have the brightness and contrast node, just playing with it a bit. Then we have the lens distortion node, just set slightly so it doesn't warp the entire image. And I think the most favorite part of the entire node setup is this dreamy effect I have, which makes use of a glare node set to sunbeam, added with a mix with an overlay, and another glare node set to blue, with another mix color set to lighten. So once we have this enabled, it will look something like this. And I added another glare node set to sunbeam again, just to give that extra pop. And we then have two Kurohara nodes and two filters. So one Kurohara node, another Kurohara node with two filters, one set to diamond sharpen and another set to diamond soften, just to give it this painterly effect a bit more. Mix the both of them, and I added a color correction node, so enabling that you can see the difference. And then we have our curve. Before I added another curve, keep in mind the first curve is set to standard while the other one is set to filmic, which gives us the entire effect before I sent it into Resolve for Post Pro. Here's what the entire node setup looks like. So there you have it, from stylized industrial in Blender to ground offset and the comp nodes. If you found this really helpful, don't forget to smash that like button, share, and subscribe. See you next time.